Hi, good morning. Can everyone hear me in the waiting room? Yep. Okay, great. Good morning. My name's Angelica Maharo. I am a parent of an Aspen High School student. On behalf of the Colorado Western Slope College Fair, I want to welcome everyone on this Sunday fall morning to telling your story, the application essay. The names of the, I guess, admissions officers. Is that your title? I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, great. I have Jack Iyer from Kenyon College. I have Bill Prescott, and if you wouldn't mind, Jack, just giving us a little wave. I have Bill Prescott from Oberlin. Thank you. And then I have Rosendo Aquino Science. Do you want to correct me on that?
Yeah, it's Rosendo Anguiano Science.
Science. Ooh, I almost had it. From Connecticut College. So I want to welcome you and thank you for hosting this. We're going to start off with 30 minutes speaking about their schools, and then we'll end the last 15 minutes with some Q&A from the students. We would welcome any question, all questions. So without further ado, why don't you take it over?
Fantastic. Thank you, Angelica. We are so pleased to be here with you all here this morning or this afternoon, wherever you might be. I know it's a pleasure to be able to speak with you this morning to talk with you a little bit more of a specific workshop about telling your story through specifically the application essay. Again, my name is Jack Iyer. I'm with Kenyon College. I'm joined by my colleagues, Bill Prescott and Rosendo Anguiano Science. We are thrilled to be able to be with you this morning to talk a little bit about the application essay. This just gives you a brief rundown of what we'll ideally talk about with you all this morning. We'll talk about the personal essay, kind of breaking down some myths versus realities of what makes up the essay, maybe how to identify certain topics, what topics might be more ideal versus others, and we can kind of think out loud about that. We'll also talk about different supplements. Certainly you all will be considering different colleges that might require various supplements of sorts. And so we can talk about what supplements might look like, how to go about tackling a supplement, and how that might differ or be similar to your personal essay itself. We'll finish with a little bit of advice, and then we'll kind of talk again at the end of the session. We'll open the floor. Any questions, comments, concerns about anything that we said or otherwise, we are happy to work with you in that regard. So firstly, I'll kind of kick us off with four different things to think about when you think about the personal essay in particular, and then myths versus realities. So the first myth is that sometimes there's an idea in mind that if you write the best essay ever, that automatically is going to get you into any single college that you can think of, right? And that is not necessarily the case, because you realize that the essay at the end of the day is very likely one part of many in your application. I know there are various amount of colleges that employ what's called holistic review, which basically means that they review all your different parts of your applications holistically, and so your essay is simply one part. So you do want to have a strong essay, but at the end of the day, it's not the end-all be-all, if you will. Another myth, an essay should be formal and can prove that you can write sesquipedalian prose, right? So some of you may or may not even know the word sesquipedalian, right? That's basically the point of this, right? You don't necessarily have to feel like you need to use the most poignant language, right? Or a word you just learned to feel like you have to impress, the admission officer or whatnot. At the end of the day, your essay should very much represent your voice, right? So however it is that you write and in the way in which you approach your writing assignments and your essays, that is absolutely how you should approach how you go about writing your essay. Another myth is that an essay should highlight all of your distinctive attributes and accomplishments. That's certainly something that you want your application overall to reflect, all your attributes and accomplishments, but you don't necessarily want to do that through the essay itself, right? The essay is not a brag sheet or a resume. You want to stick to one theme, whatever the topic might be. and you really want to just stick and roll with that, right? You don't want to incorporate other outside irrelevant aspects of your writing into your essay. You want to stick to the theme, to the topic, and to go from there. And lastly, a myth being that your topic or observations must be very outlandish to stand out. I think there's the myth surrounding that you have to capture the reader's attention in a really crazy, outlandish manner. And again, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. And at the end of the day, realize that your essay will be distinctive because it conveys your perspective, your experiences, and your voice as well. So really continue to think about from start to finish how you can use your essay as a way to go about doing that. I'll pass over to my colleague, Rosendo.
Hi, Jack. Yeah. All right. So I'm Rosendo from Connecticut College again, and I want to get into identifying your topic. And so I think you have to importantly start with those Common App prompts. There are 7 this year, and it's good to start looking at those and understanding which might work for you. And it is a 650-word essay, which can feel kind of small and it can feel kind of large at times, depending on where you are throughout the process. So before I get into the specifics about topics, here's some things to continue kind of thinking about as you're writing it. And that is your audience is the first one. And that'll be us, including other people on our staff. So age ranges might be from 20 to 60 plus, and we're going to be reading 20 to 50 essays every day. And so we are going to be reading a large volume. And so the language you're using, and it was kind of mentioned by Jack, so it doesn't have to be anything crazy, anything out there. It's really about your own voice and your ability in the language to convey a little bit of yourself. And so when you're writing it, can you give your essay to someone else? Can they read it easily? Can they understand what you're trying to say? It's kind of a good rule of thumb for understanding that target audience. And then there aren't any wrong topics. And because it is really about your own self and understanding a little bit piece of yourself. And who you are as a student is not going to just be seen only in this essay. It's going to be much bigger than that. And, Jack covered on this as well, but it is part of that larger, it's a part of that larger image where your application is going to have so many parts to it that your essay does need to be well written and it does need to say something about yourself. But just because your essay isn't quite where you want it to be doesn't mean that's going to be the thing that makes or breaks any of your admissions. But the last point is really the most important one, which is the meaning matters. And it's really about getting into understanding you. So the so what, the why does what you're telling me, why does, your playing trumpet for 5 years matter? Why does your topic matter to you as a person, as an individual, and really getting that picture. Perfect. Okay. And then, as you're thinking about how to proceed, it might be kind of confusing or overwhelming to have so many options and just try to fit a piece of you into such a small piece of writing. So here are kind of 2 tracks that are pretty good to start with. You can start with insight. And so maybe you understand the importance of being connected in a community or something along those lines. And so how do you best represent that understanding, that feeling? How do you show that importance to you, yourself, and maybe it's greater importance? How do you say that? Or maybe it's a powerful experience. So maybe you took a road trip across the country, or you spent months perfecting bread at home. What does that mean? How do you understand that? What did you gain from that? Is it because you spent hours researching, or is it because you stayed determined and didn't fall asleep on the road? Was it something you did by yourself or with others? And how did that connect to you as an individual? And that's really the goal of this is, that little piece of you. Okay, and then I think next one. Perfect. Okay, and here's just a couple more frameworks. So essence objects. And so you can kind of imagine yourself having this box, and you'll have this box and you want to put objects into it. And each one of these objects needs to represent a piece of you in some way, of friendship, of value, a memory, just something that represents, maybe it's something that you always do every day. It might be, maybe your phone goes in that box, but why do you put that thing in your box? Because it's really about putting, those important defining things about yourself, the ways you might define yourself. And so find an image or something and put it in that box. And then as you kind of understand everything that you want to use to define yourself, it becomes easier to understand what you want to put in the essay. And then the next one, a meaningful tradition. And I think a tradition might sound like it's something big, like, oh, you always do this during the holidays or something along those lines. But a tradition can really just be a ritual you have, an action you take every day. So maybe you always play your favorite song while you brush your teeth, but what does that, why is it that song? Why do you always have that music on? And understanding, those habits you have as well. And that's another great way to, put the pieces of you together. Why do you like the things that you like? It's just understanding those, it's understanding, breaking down what you are and the so what of it all. Oh, did the presentation get funky for anyone else?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, perfect.
Here we go. Sorry, so sorry about that.
All right, yeah, no worries. Okay, when are you happiest and where are you happiest? These are all really that frameworks to get into the what makes you you. And it's not about what you might see as the larger image, what you might think someone wants to hear about you. It's what you would want to hear about you, that piece of you. What do you want to put forward? Because this is one of those great opportunities you have to say something about yourself in a more open-ended format. Okay, that's a little bit about finding the topic, and I'm going to pass it over to Bill.
Awesome. Thanks, Rosendo and Jack. Really excited to get to present with all of you. And for those of you who missed kind of introduction at the beginning, my name is Bill Prescott. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm one of the senior assistant directors of admission at Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio. Really excited to get a chance to chat with all of you today, share a little bit of advice about the essay topics and kind of how we look at essays in the application. And this is one of my favorite topics to kind of talk about, just because the essay is my favorite part of the application to read. And it's really, for me, such an honor and a privilege to get to work with students like yourselves and hear your stories kind of in the essay. So kind of in this last little section here, before we open it up for questions, I'm going to talk a little bit first about kind of supplemental essays, and then also some general advice and tips and tricks and kind of how we look at applications and look at the essay in particular. So one thing you've noticed, particularly for seniors maybe here in the room, is a lot of schools will have what we call supplemental essay questions in addition to the general common application essay. These vary school by school. Some schools will just have one question. Some schools might have a couple. Some schools might not have any. And the questions they ask vary pretty dramatically. And also the number of words or characters that they can use will vary as well. I think there are some common themes you'll see amongst supplemental essay questions. So a very common one you'll see amongst a lot of schools is what we like to call the why this college kind of question. So really kind of thinking about why am I particularly interested in Oberlin or Kenyon or Connecticut College? And talk to me a little bit about that. Some schools will ask, why have you indicated this particular academic interest on your application? Kind of why are you looking at this particular program or study or path in college? Others may ask talk a little bit more about an activity or something you're involved in outside the classroom that's really important to you. Others may ask you to talk about kind of examples of books, articles, magazines, media you consume, getting that kind of personal perspective. Others may ask about kind of intellectual demanding questions, kind of what makes you tick, kind of how you would contribute to the life and learning in that particular academic community. And then there are some schools that are known for having quirky questions. I think it's important to look every single year at what topics schools will ask. I know some schools will have the same supplemental essay questions every single year. Others may change it up a little bit year to year and kind of create new opportunities for students to be creative kind of in those supplements. So I think it's important to look at those, kind of think about those questions carefully. I think the purpose for, a lot of schools that use supplemental questions is to kind of really focus on that student's interest in that particular school. But I think a challenge that sometimes students fall into is you spend so many hours and so much time on your Common App general essay that you kind of forget the supplemental essays and you really rush through them and don't give them the time and care that they need. And I think that's an important thing to think about, because if schools are asking questions on their supplements, that usually means that that's something that's important to that particular institution. And again, not every school will have a supplemental essay question, but really take the time to really personalize and try to customize that question to that particular college. If a school is asking why Oberlin, why Kenyon, why Connecticut College, make sure it goes beyond just the generic, well, you're a great school and you have my major and I want a small liberal arts college, which all three of us have. Think about what makes that school specific. Think about, go to the college's website, take a look at what they're talking about on the front page of the admissions website, what on the front page of the school's website. Think about if you've had interactions with the admissions office, done a virtual info session, an interview, a panel, or maybe you had the opportunity to connect with someone in person. What were some of the key things that they talked about kind of in there? I think those are important things to think about kind of on the why college question. For some of those other questions about academic interests or kind of interest in how you contribute to a community, for example, kind of keep up on think about things you're really interested in. Why are you thinking about this particular study? And it's okay if you don't know, and it's fine to say that too. But think about what makes you tick. What do you want to do? Keep involved and kind of keep track of different things that you can use for these different questions. I mean, you can definitely use similar themes for supplemental essay questions, but make sure you do customize it. I always tell students one of the worst pitfalls I've seen students make on supplemental essay questions is is putting the wrong name of the college or university they're applying to in that supplemental essay. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but I can count more times than I care to remember on the amount of times I've seen in a supplemental essay, a student saying, I want to apply to, I'm just going to pick Oberlin, for example. I want to apply to Oberlin, and we're located in New London, Connecticut, where Connecticut College is located. Very different. So I can tell, like, that's not that. I want that student to be a little more specific and more personal. So that's, I think, an important thing to think about with supplemental essay questions. Next slide, please, Jack. So I think in terms of, so that's a little bit about supplemental essay questions. I think in terms of advice with the essays in general, and this is something we can definitely talk more about in the Q&A as well. And I know I dropped in the chat a link to the Common App essay prompts for this year is, I think making sure you give that essay enough time and sufficient thought and care kind of throughout the process. One of the things I always tell students is the essay is one of the few parts really in the application you have full control over in the process. So when you're applying to college, your grades are what they are at this point. Your curriculum is what it is. Your extracurriculars, you know what you've been involved in kind of at this point. But the essay is the part you have the most control over. So make sure you give it enough kind of time and care and effort. But recognize, as Jack mentioned at the beginning, the essay is not the be-all, end-all in this conversation, especially for schools like the three of ours, where we practice holistic admission. So we're not basing the decision solely on just if you wrote a great essay or not. It's every single component in the application together in that experience. And I think it's also important when you're thinking about the essay topics and what do I write about, what do I not write about, to really use this as an opportunity to learn more about yourself. Kind of think about what experiences you've had, what experiences you want to share with the college, and kind of highlight your ability as a writer. Students have a lot of different levels and abilities as writers, but really highlighting how strong of what your strengths are in a particular writing kind of experience. I think it's also important to note that we want you to really retain control and really understand that this is your voice and perspective and talents you're sharing with that particular with that application. One of something I always tell students before they submit their application is, before you hit submit to that particular college you're applying to, take a look at the essay, take a look at the application overall, and really ask, does this application truly represent the voice, talent, perspective, and identity I want that particular college to hear about me? And I think if it does, then that's really what you want to do. Students, I think, will often ask, like, is this topic something I should write about? Something I shouldn't write about? And I always like to say there aren't bad topics, but there is bad execution on certain topics. So you can write about a topic that you may have heard in those guidebooks, like everyone writes about that. But and I've seen great essays on some of those things, but the reason those essays become great is because I really learn about the student, and it goes beyond just kind of the traditional kind of standardized answer. And I think authenticity really matters in these, and speaking directly to admissions and the perspective you want to hear. I think it's also important to proofread all of your essays and read them carefully. It's great. It's definitely recommended, and I think all of us would agree on this, to have multiple people look at that essay. Have a parent, a trusted friend, your high school college counselor, other supporters of yours kind of in the college application process. Take a look at the essay, give you feedback and revisions and edits. But I think at the same time, be aware that you don't want too many, as we like to say, too many cooks in the kitchen. We don't want your voice to get lost kind of in the process. So definitely ask for feedback, ask for advice, have people check it for both the tone and grammar, but also making sure your voice doesn't get lost. We can tell when an essay really is authentically a student's voice versus when it's been too over edited and it reads like something a associate professor at a local college might have written. We really want to hear your voice and perspective. So I think that's something I always like to stress too. This does not have to be a perfect writer. We know we're not expecting you to be a Pulitzer winning author writing this essay. We really want your voice and unique perspective. I think another thing I always like to say with proofreading is spell check does not catch everything. So making sure you check carefully on tone and words and volume, things like the different there. I think of one I often see is the word peaked versus peaked. There's two different spellings of that. And when I say spell check doesn't catch everything, one of my favorite anecdotes from a former colleague of mine, she used to talk about, they were reading an essay and the student was talking about, they used to go hunting pheasants with their family, with their family. Go hunt, game hunting was a big part of their life. Spell check corrected that to hunting peasants. Very different tone, kind of meaning in that type of essay. So that's something, an example, like you have to be careful with beyond just kind of the general spell check, like make sure your tone is correct. And I think it's also important to give yourself time to complete all tasks with the essay. And Jack, if you can go to the next slide, please. I think when you're thinking about the timeline and the essay itself, make sure you make a milestone and a plan and dates kind of to plan. So hopefully at this point for seniors, you've kind of been working on this a little bit. You started kind of brainstorming topics. And if you haven't already, it's not too late, but just make sure you kind of think about the timeline and plan when those application deadlines are coming up. But give yourself enough time to start brainstorming, kind of think about different topics, kind of pieces, things you maybe want to talk about. You can have it. I know it sometimes takes a couple drafts or a couple of top examples to kind of really find that topic that you really want to write about, particularly for that Common App essay. But once you kind of hone in on that topic, start kind of writing, start thinking about kind of your format, kind of the voices, the perspectives you want to share. Give yourself enough time for others to kind of review and give you feedback, and then also plenty of time for revisions. I think it's important as well kind of to be honest about how long it's going to take you, your work strategy, your timeline, your other obligations, kind of how fast it takes you as a writer. So that's why it's important, I think, you give yourself enough time kind of in this process to really give the essay enough thought and due and care, and kind of your workload and pace. And I think it's also important to know when your essay is done. I think sometimes students feel like they have to keep tweaking and over editing. And if you feel like it's ready to be done, it gives your voice and perspective and it's ready to be submitted. Don't feel like you have to just keep tweaking just for tweaking's sake. If it's done and you're happy with it, I think it's ready to go. I think getting that Common App essay in general first done is a really big step and something I always recommend too. Just because that is the big essay, you're sending that to every single college. Having that kind of drafted and ready to go is really important, because then that gives you plenty of time to really hone in on those supplemental essays and really as we talked about, give that time and care to those supplemental essay questions that they really honestly deserve kind of throughout this process. But again, my final piece of advice I would say is just have fun, enjoy this process. The essays are a really powerful part, and as I mentioned, I love reading the stories. I think it's I always say the privilege of my job is to get to hear your stories and your voices kind of in this search process. And I know it can be stressful, but don't forget to enjoy this process. You learn a lot about yourselves. We learn a lot about you, and going to college is an incredibly exciting time. So with that, that's some of the last things I think I wanted to highlight. If you have further questions, I know we have plenty of time here for Q&A about the essays or about our colleges in particular. But also feel free to email any of us. We're happy to chat more about essay topics or writing, or about our particular institutions. I know we'll all be in our individual booths throughout the fair in the next couple hours as well, so you can talk to us more about our individual schools. But with that, I think at this point, we want to turn it over to getting questions from from folks here in the audience. So I think you can do it in a couple different ways. You can either do the raise hand function, we can answer questions that way. You can also drop questions in the chat, either for the larger audience to answer, or you can also private message any of us, Jack, Rosendo, or I, and we can also take questions that way. But I see we have a question, looks like hand raised from Gavin.
So, hey everyone, that was a good speech. I appreciated that. That was really cool. Even though on those like supplemental essays, would you say they're kind of to build upon your kind of application essay, or are they more of like a Q&A kind of style?
I can kind of take a first stab at this. I think, first of all, thank you for your question, Gavin. I think the thing with supplements is that they're kind of really particular to each college and university, right? So if you're applying to a whole slate of different schools, and if they require supplements, oftentimes they might be similar, but they might also be different. So I think the thing to realize at the end of the day is that if you're applying to colleges and universities and they have supplements, not all of them will necessarily be the same. But I think to your other point, I think, basically the biggest purpose behind supplements is that, yes, they are there to kind of help, boost, your application, right? So oftentimes you can use maybe supplements as a way to talk about an additional characteristic or important aspect of your identity that maybe you didn't get to talk about in another part of your application. So I think the biggest takeaway with supplements is realizing that they are very much tailored and individualized to specific colleges and universities, right? So they may or may not be the same.
Thank you.
Yeah, see, we have another question here kind of about where would one find past supplemental questions from a school? Are they archives? It's a great question. I'll just start kind of with Oberlin, and then I love Jack and Rose. I know you guys can add kind of your thoughts on this. So we actually don't have a supplemental essay question in Oberlin, so we just ask for the general Common App essay. But I think one piece of advice I say is go on colleges' websites. A lot of them will put those essays up pretty early in advance, or if they're a school that changes questions pretty frequently, they may have passed it years. But usually schools post that pretty early. But Jack and Rosendo, I love if you guys to kind of give your context on that too.
Yeah, at Con we don't have any supplemental essays either, so it's not something we'll have, but we do post last year and the past couple of years essays that worked in general. So any school that has supplementals, just check out their website and it's very nice.
I will echo that as well. Kenyon does not have supplements, but you can certainly, reach out to us and we can kind of connect you to, we can have a conversation about what you might be thinking about with regards to your Common App essay. So thank you for the question.
See, we've got a program about study abroad, which we can definitely address. I guess one question I would love, Jack and Rosanna, I think that I always love getting, that I get a lot of times when we do these sessions is kind of topics to write about or topics to avoid, and kind of what advice any of us would have about difficult topics or kind of things to avoid, topics to avoid kind of in that essay question. Either of you want to kind of kick that off? I'm happy to jump in as well too.
Yeah, I can kind of start with just a little note. A common theme might be to try and write about essays that are about troubled times in your lives, something that might be traumatic to yourself, which, if that's something you feel like writing about and that's something you feel is important and you feel comfortable writing about, then you are absolutely welcome to. But it's also something where this essay is not meant to be a difficult experience for you. It's meant to just tell us a piece of you. So it's important that if there's a troubled time and you don't feel like writing about it, it doesn't mean that you need to write about it in order to get, into a college. That's not the goal, and that's not what needs to go in your essay.
Yeah, I will follow up and echo that in the sense of you know, there's not necessarily you know, a wrong topic per se, but I think if you do want to, whatever you, I think the biggest takeaway is that whatever you choose to write about, make sure there's a purpose behind you selecting that, right? Like you're not just picking that topic because you think that the college that you're applying to wants you to talk about that topic, right? So whatever it is that you want to address about yourself, you know, like Bill kind of talked about a memory, or Rosendo, it was Rosendo that's talking about a memory, an idea, you know, a tradition, something important and relevant to your identity or to your life, you know, just use that as a way to tell us why that's important, right? And so I don't necessarily want to sit here and say, you know, you're not allowed to write about this or this or this because that's cliche or whatnot, because that those things might be important and relevant to you and a necessary part of who you are as a person. So we want you to write about that, but just use the essay as an opportunity to tell us why that experience, that memory, that part of your identity is important to you, right? So I think hopefully that gives a little bit more help there.
Yeah, thanks for that, guys. I would echo those same kind of points. I think you can write about difficult topics. You can write about things like that are challenging if that's something you feel like is important to your identity. But I think getting to that positive conclusion or getting to a place that feel that it's kind of shows your growth is really important. I think also when I think about that, I think students will often say like, well, I shouldn't write about this particular topic or whatnot. And I think, as I mentioned, kind of you can write about any topic you want. And when I think about the Common App essay prompts, one of the prompts is choose a topic of your own choice. So you can literally write about anything kind of in that essay. But getting to that place, I think another area students sometimes they'll write about a person who's really important or impactful in their life, and that's can be a really great essay. But I also want to know like what that means to you, not just why this person is so amazing. The other thing I would mention too is that there are sections in the application, the additional information section, as well as the in the past for this last admission cycle and for this admission cycle, where the Common App has added a section kind of on impacts of COVID-19. So if there are things you don't necessarily feel like you want to write about in your general Common App essay, but you feel like are really important for the admissions committee to know, use the additional information section, use the COVID response short answer. If you feel like there's things that are important to know, you don't have to use those sections, but I also think those are important places for students to kind of give additional context if they don't feel like that's something they want to fully just devote their entire essay kind of section for.
Yeah. I will very briefly echo the importance of Bill's point to wrapping your essay in a positive manner, right? Showing that positive conclusion and then kind of explaining a little bit how you grew from that experience or whatnot. And so I think that's really crucial. I have a question that was actually messaged to me that I can pose to the group. And thank you for your question. So the question is, should essays usually fit into your application as a whole, or should they tell something new that's not already on your application?
That's a great question. I can start with that. I guess. I think it can be either or. I think for some students, if you tie the essay into, if you have a theme kind of coming through, like I give the example, like I had a student in recent years who was a very talented gymnast, and gymnastics was a huge part of her life, and she wrote her essay about that, and it really tied into everything else she was doing. I think also I've seen successful essays where students kind of go the opposite way. They're very involved in a lot of different things that come through in the extracurriculars and the academics, and they write an essay on something that they haven't really talked as much about in other parts of the application because they want to show like this is also a really important part of my life and perspective and experience. So I don't think there's an either or, at least from my perspective. I'd be curious to hear what Rosendo and Jack, what you all think.
Yeah, I think I'd echo that as well. It is really, it is it's a holistic review, especially among us, we're looking at the entire application. So maybe if there's something really important to you that you just can't fit into the standard boxes that we already have, that essay might be that perfect opportunity to fit in, maybe that hobby that you haven't pursued in a club, or maybe it's something you do by yourself, something you don't have anything to show for in the most traditional sense, but it's still a part of yourself. That can be a great way, or maybe it might be a great way to kind of framework everything else you've done and understand why you might be so committed to something and why you've really involved yourself in those communities.
Mhm. I think the last point I'll say is that you want, ideally, before you submit your application, to have it feel very cohesive, right? And so I think in that sense, when you think about the essay in particular, thinking about how you want to structure your essay to create that cohesion. Do you think that you'll need to talk about something different, a different passion or interest of yours that wasn't previously highlighted to create that cohesion? Or, when you listed a few different things on your extracurricular section of the Common App, do you feel like you need to use the essay as a vehicle to explain your interests and passion and background in those different areas, right? To create that cohesion. So think about ways that you can cultivate that cohesion. And to answer your question, essays can either, they can certainly be either or, right? They can explain something new that's not on your application, or they can be used as a way to go into more detail about that. So thank you for your question. I did have another one that was actually messaged to me. Question is, when should you have your essay done? And I think briefly about that, certainly you want to have it done before the deadlines of whatever schools you're applying to. And I think even ideally, you might even want to have it done before then, right? Because I think, so we talked a little bit in the presentation about, proofreading, right? You want to give yourself an appropriate amount of time to proofread and to bounce, your essays if you have, important trusted people in your life, parents, guardians, friends, family members, anything like that, if you want them to read, right? So I think there's no like specific date that you have to get it done by, but obviously you want to make sure that it's all completely ready and to be submitted before the deadline of whatever colleges you're applying to. I don't know, Bill or Rosendo, you have anything else on that?
I would agree. And I think the timeline is different student to student. But I think it's important kind of to make sure you give yourself enough time. So like, and that's where I was talking about being honest with yourself. Like for some students, they'll spend a good amount of time over the summer really getting that ready, and they'll come into school pretty much with at least their general essay done. Some students, it's a little bit cut closer to the deadline, but I think it's important to make sure you give it enough time. And I think the biggest pitfall I see students do, and for school, especially with schools that have supplemental essay questions, and I've worked at different institutions that have supplemental essay questions, is they spend all this time, they spend so much time perfecting the Common App essay, but they then rush through the supplemental essay questions and don't give those the care and the due that they really need in that review process. And I think that's an important thing, to make sure you're honest with that timeline and kind of things like that. And I always, my piece of advice with students too, with the application in general, is it's okay if you submit it right up until the very last minute before the deadline. But I always like to recommend students give yourself a little bit of a buffer period before that deadline. Make sure you get everything done a day or two in advance, especially around like deadlines in early January and things like that, when admission offices may be closed, your counselor might not be available because of the holiday break and things like that. Give yourself a little bit of a buffer, but that's why it's important to be honest about your workload and other commitments and kind of timelines kind of in this process, make sure you're not rushing through it, because this is what, as I mentioned, this is the part of the application you control. So give it enough time and thought. Rosendo, anything else you wanted to add?
The only thing I'd add is you know your own timeline and how you work as a writer, and that's important. But also know that if you're having someone else proofread your essay or help you rework it, you don't know their timeline, and so that's where your buffer, that breathing room, is so important, because you don't want to be, it's 11 p.m. and you're just hoping to get your essay back at that last minute. That's a lot of stress on yourself on the process that you don't need to have, and to let yourself really put your best essay forward, breathe, and also know that other people need room to breathe too. So just give everyone wiggle room.
Looks like we have a question again from Gavin.
Yeah, on the essays, are there any like methods or points on like how we write the essays that you guys are looking for as colleges? Like, I don't know, like our tone or our diction for our essays?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that, Gavin. I think the biggest thing to include with this when you think about how to write your essay is at the end of the day, I think we're really just most invested in hearing your particular voice, right? So I don't necessarily think that you need to feel like you need to reinvent the wheel of how you write as a person, right? So again, I think it goes to our earlier points about don't feel like you need to add an additional crazy flowery language that you don't typically use, or write about something that you're completely unfamiliar with, right? Or using certain techniques that you haven't used before in writing. And so we really just want to encourage you to use your particular voice in creating your essays. And so I don't know, Rosanna or Bill, if you have something to add to that.
I think that's well said.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, again, I think it's important to write how the perspective and voice you want the college to know about you, rather than kind of trying to create your tone in the language to what you think the college admissions representative wants to hear. I think it's just important to make sure, like, this doesn't have to be the traditional five paragraph structured essay, but I think it's also important to note, like, we do want to make sure it does flow grammatically and clear and kind of things like that. I mean, I think sometimes students will do things like poems or more kind of non-traditional kind of essay topics, and I've seen those work well, but they also can be risky, and you have to be careful, and you have to make sure it doesn't come off that it actually can come off in a coherent way, and then we learn something about you, not trying to just be creative for creative kind of sake. But we don't expect, as I mentioned, like every student to be a Pulitzer winning author or like a professor of English at a college. We really want to hear your voice, and we recognize that, like, as I always say, and Jack touched on this a little bit, like, we're reading these essays very quickly. Like, I'm spending a couple of minutes kind of looking through an essay when I'm reading the application. So I try not to be the grammar police on every single, like, oh, you missed a comment here or there, things like that. If it's really noticeably bad grammar, I will definitely note that, or lots of misspellings. But we recognize that we're not expecting every essay to be 100% polished. We really want that authentic voice and your voice and perspectives. So we have a couple minutes left for Q&A. Kind of here, are there any final questions? I know we have a question about study abroad that we can always go back to as well, but I just want to leave some space if there's any final questions from folks here in the audience about the essays.
Actually, someone has emailed or texted me a question, so I was going to forward it, but I'll go ahead and ask the question for, I believe it's Kaki, C-A-K-K-I. If a student wanted to work in an English major, would the essays be looked over more thoroughly in an English perspective than other applicants not looking to have an English major?
I think that's a fantastic question, and certainly a pertinent one. I'll speak on behalf of Kenyon in the the institution I represent, and that would not be the case. We at Kenyon are just evaluating your writing completely independent of what your intended major will be, right? So if you're interested in being an English major, chemistry major, French major, truly whatever major, we're not going to be evaluating your essay any more harshly or less harshly dependent on your particular major. So.
Yeah, I think for Connecticut College, we kind of have that same sentiment, especially because we're not asking you to declare, and you can't actually declare in your application. You can show interest and you can tell us what you want to pursue, but we don't require that. And when you are on campus, you have time to decide. And so to designate you in the application, it wouldn't quite fit what our goal is as an institution. But some other schools, if you're planning to declare English major as you join, that might be something relevant in that particular school. So it is a case by case, but
yeah, I would echo that. I think for us at Oberlin, since you're applying to the college overall, not to a particular major, we don't more heavily scrutinize English or creative writing potential students over others. I think kind of going back to that supplemental question, I think sometimes if you're asking for if a school's asking why this particular academic interest on a supplement, that is something to be thoughtful of. But I think for a lot of schools, especially like the three of ours, we have general education or distribution requirements that students have to fulfill. So regardless of what area of study, we want to make sure that you have the well-rounded depth and breadth and kind of strength in your writing that you can, even if you're planning to major in the sciences, that you'll be able to take a humanities class that may be pretty writing intensive and be able to handle the workload that that college may ask. So I think it varies school to school, but we're not necessarily harsher on a potential English major at Oberlin than we would be for a science major per se.
Gentlemen, do we have time for one more question, or are you okay with this?
Yeah.
Short
Yeah,
one. It's from, it was sent to
absolutely.
me, it was from Andrea Miklos.
Okay.
Do schools prefer that you apply to them directly, or is the Common App viewed as equally valid? Which I think is an excellent question.
Yeah, I guess I'll start off, but I'd say it's equally valid. Here at Connecticut College, we only accept Common App, so there's no way to directly apply through us. The Common App is our application. Yeah, so it is equal.
Yeah, again, I would say this is dependent on the institutions that you're applying to, right? Some like Rosendo with Connecticut College, you can only apply to Con, for example, through the Common App. You know, there might be other schools where you can apply through a whole variety of different applications. There might be some schools where they have their own individual application and they don't accept the Common App, right? So these are all different ways. So this is definitely a significant example of do your research on your schools that you're going to apply to and the ways in which or means that you can apply to the different schools, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of different application types out there. We accepted Oberlin, just for example, the Common App, the Coalition application, and we're also a Questbridge partner institution. So we have 3 different applications. We don't care which one you use, to be honest with you. We're the Common App is used by, I think it's hundreds of different schools. So we all accept the general. The nice thing with that is that it's the same general kind of framework of that. And then schools will have their own supplemental sections that you fill out, some with essays, some without. So some schools will have their own homegrown applications, but in general, most schools don't care which one you give priority to, like you applied through Common App versus Coalition App or Questbridge or the school's individual application. They're all kind of equal in that process, and they're all going to ask kind of the same kind of questions in the process too. So, yeah.
All right, excellent, thank you. Well, I think that concludes our workshop. I want to thank all of the panelists. I thought this was excellent. I thought the questions were on point, so thank you very much. I think without further ado, I think that's it, right? Okay, excellent. All right, gentlemen. So I guess we will see you in your breakout rooms at 11. Is that correct?
Yep.
All right,
Oh,
great.
yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for participating. It's been a very successful workshop and very informative.
Yes. Thank you all for your time this morning.
Yeah.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.